All right. A very good evening and welcome to the Flipside webinar series. So Flipside is basically a webinar series where we discuss important lessons from books. So my name is Fulel and I'll be your host for today. So to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a 22-year-old and I'm lucky enough to work as an inspirer at Pick a Book. So the current book I'm reading is called Sales Diamond by Mark Holmes. So I'll tell you a little bit about Pick a Book and how it started. So Pick a Book is a global movement for readers. So they say the best way to learn is to teach somebody. So we encourage the reading habit by getting all participants to select a book, read and research on it thoroughly and present a summary. So which also helps to hone his or her public speaking skills, communication, and presentation skills. So, by doing this, Pick a Book not only inculcates the habit of reading, but also helps to impart a wealth of knowledge. So, Pick a Book started off as an enthusiastic approach towards inculcating the habit of reading among the staff members of a company called Epitome Digital. So, this started off as a fun initiative and quickly picked up interest among the connections of the staff. So, with massive public encouragement, Pick a Book gradually widened its roots and expanded to include public reading sessions. So right now we have segments for kids, adults, teenagers, corporates, schools and universities, and communities. So what started off as a fun office activity where one staff member read a chapter of a specific book and presented it to the others garnered much interest among those who like to read but never found the time. Thus, Pick a Book was born with public reading sessions and a much loved platform for readers of all ages. So that's a little bit about the history of Pick a Book. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panelist for today. We have Vimukti joining with us. He is basically a software consultant in one of the leading IT companies in Sri Lanka. And he is also a fresh graduate from Kothalawala Defense University. So in his free time, he loves to listen to music, watch documentaries, and read when he's free. And our next panelist is Abhimanta Vijayasundara. So he's a 10-year-old, a very interesting 10-year-old. He's from Lyceum College, International School, Vatala, and he loves to assemble circuits during using Tinkercad and likes to code, and he loves to learn C language and Python. He also loves to read and is very much interested in robotics and artificial intelligence. So he also has his own blog. It's abhimantavijayasundara.com. So make sure to check it out. So welcome you guys to the Flipside webinar series. So glad to have you here. All right.
Hi, here.
Yes. So let's start with the first question directed towards Vimukti. Vimukti, like before I ask questions about this book, you have chosen a very interesting book. It's called Principles by Ray Dalio. May I know why you selected this book and how you came across it?
Yes, Bilal. Actually, this book is a gift from my uncle. He gave me this book back in 2019, I guess. So ever since I'm reading this book, actually, it's a big book. But even I have not seen this book in many places in Sri Lanka. I guess it's a valuable book and it has so many insightful messages and principles. And I'm hoping to share it with you.
All right. Thank you, Vimukti. Super excited to have discuss that book with you. And next we have Abhimant discussing Steve Jobs, an autobiography. So very interesting book, Abhimant. How did you come across it and why did you select it?
Yeah, so my father got it for me from Big Bad Wolf. So this book, so it's really interesting. There are many facts about him, and this is a this is a biography actually, and yeah, it's one of my favorite books, and this is why I said to select it.
All right. So I see you are interested in a lot of technology and robotics. So glad to have you here as well. So let's direct the next question to Vimukti. So can you give us a brief introduction about this book?
Useful. So, as I said, this book is written by Ray Dalio. Ray is an American billionaire and a philanthropist. You might have heard of him, most of you. And this book they published in 2017. And you see, Bill Gates has said, Dalio has provided me with valuable guidance and insights that are now available to you. So you see, Bill Gates recommends it. So it's a great book indeed. And most importantly, let me tell you why Ray wrote this book, because he gives a great introduction to this book. He says that he is at his stage of life in a stage where he should share the message of success with us, with the next generation. So that is the main reason he wanted to put all of his principles in one book and make it available for all of us. And if I were to speak about the structure of this book, there are actually mainly three parts. In the first part, Ray speaks about his journey. He calls it Where I'm Coming From. And secondly, he speaks about the life principles. And thirdly, in the third part, he speaks about the work principles. And these life principles and work principles are not totally different to each other, but rather these work principles are written or developed on top of the life principles. And also, just to keep you guys curious, one of the most important or one of the most fascinating principles that I've learned from the book is how, or the importance of learning how people are wired differently. So soon we'll be able to go in depth with that. Thank you, Fulay.
All right, Vimukti, that sounds very interesting. So I do know a little bit about Ray Dalio in the sense that he's a billionaire and a philanthropist. But only recently did I come to know that he had written a book about his life principles. So I'm guessing the theme is kind of common here. So you have chosen a book by a billionaire hedge fund manager, I'm guessing.
Yes,
And
yes. And most interesting thing is, Fulail, in the investment world, he is titled as the Steve Jobs of investing. So yes, we have a nice match today.
all right, so Abhimanta, I'd like to jump into it's your turn to answer my questions now. So you have chosen the book Steve Jobs. Now, can you give us a little bit of, can you give a summary about the book and the author?
Yeah, before I answer your question, I will quote a review written by Booklist for this book. So, this is a smart book about a smart subject by a smart writer. So, the book, Steve Jobs, The Man Who Thought Different, a biography, was written by Karen Blumenthal, who worked as an American business journalist, published author, and educator. She has written more books like Hillary, 6 Days in October, and Mr. Sam, and many more. This is an accessible and well-written biography, and I strongly agree with the above review written by Booklist. And yeah, I really like this book.
Okay, not only you, we like the book as well because it's about a great genius of a person called Steve Jobs. So thank you, Abhimanta. So let's move on to Vimukti. Now, Vimukti, I, I know a little bit about Ray Dalio. Could you tell the audience members a little bit about him? And can you give us a small introduction to Ray Dalio?
Yes, Fulal, thank you. Yes, I agree with you because it is really important to know some facts about the author of the book when it's come to understanding the book. So when it comes to Ray, he was born just after the Second World War in 1949 in New York, United States, and he's the only son of his family. And luckily, he has been a bright student at school, and he started working at a very young age, like 14 or 13, if I'm not mistaken. And he worked at this golf club in Long Island, New York, where he met these investors and uh, financial experts in the country, and they were talking about the Wall Street. And so he was moved into investments and this financial sector at a very young age. So he invested stocks in one of the companies in United States, and he was earning a little bit of money when he was very young. So that resonates with Warren Buffett as well, because it's the passion of them, investments, and handling market and the financial sector. And later Ray was graduated from Harvard Business School, and then after that, after being graduated from HBS, he started working in several Wall Street investment companies for several years. And something funny happens there. He actually punches one of his managers in face in an office party. So ultimately, as you can guess it correctly, he was fired from that company because of that. But even though he was fired, his clients and customers were in contact with him. So because of that, he formed this company, Bridgewater Associates, with his university mates. And this Bridgewater Associates is his company, and this came to a very good position in the country and the world. Even the governments and financial experts are still referring to his papers and the publishments of this Bridgewater company. And ultimately, it becomes the fifth most important company private company in USA at some extent, and it becomes the world's largest hedge fund, and it is. And when it comes to Ray, he becomes one of the most influential people in the world, and he gets into the first 100 of this list, and he is the 79th wealthiest person at some point. And as I mentioned earlier, he is called the Steve Jobs of investing because of his few very unique and interesting financial tools and investment products. And he likes very much himself to be titled like that, because he adores and he admires Steve Jobs very much. And just let me give few of his personality traits as well, because I guess that will be very important once again to understand the content. And he had a very high level of confidence, and he is a good observer and a good listener. And he is a radical person. If not being radical, would you punch the boss in the face? Yes, he is radical. And he is a very risk-taking person, a fundamental characteristics of any entrepreneur. And he is interested in people, very much interested in people. It could be the Steve Jobs to the one who drives his car or a taxi. He wants to learn from people. And he has this very unique ability of looking back at himself and reflecting upon his things and build these principles. So that's something about Ray Dalio. Yes, Fulal, I hope that would do.
All right, that's quite a resume, don't you think?
Yes,
like even from a very young age to start investing. So, like one thing I noticed about this book was the amount of positive reviews by great celebrities like Tony Robbins and Bill Gates. So, great selection of book, Vimukti. So let's move on to the next question to Abhimanta. So Abhimanta, we are talking about leaders. So Ray Dalio is one of the leaders, and even Steve Jobs was a leader. So what exactly makes Steve Jobs a good leader?
Well, who is a leader? According to me, a leader is a person who makes another leader. A leader motivates people. So, a great leader has a clear vision and a clear focus. They help people reach their goals and are not afraid to hire people who might be better than them and will take pride in accomplishments. There are different leadership styles. Steve's style was autocratic, which means a leader who has absolute power. He had a precise eye for detail. He wanted everything to be simple and unique. For example, the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro were simple and unique. He was creative. The Apple Watch, for example, was like a mini phone in your hand. And he was the reason why Apple is the best company in the world. And he also said, innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower. I really like that quote.
All right. I love that quote too, Abhimanta. So thank you for that amazing answer. Uh, so Vimukti, my next question to you is, what are some special incidents that happened in Ray's life, which ultimately helped to shape his journey to who he is? So apart from the fact that he punched one of his managers, what are some other life-changing incidents in Ray's life?
Yes, Fulel. Just like for anybody else, these incidents and special incidents and falls are the ones which shape our life. So when it comes to Ray, he gives so many of these incidents. But let me just pick two very interesting and touching incidents. So the first one is that his son, one of his sons, gets diagnosed with the bipolar disorder, right? So for any father, that's shocking and tense. So the family was obliterated, and they were really, upset. But Ray, because of this, that they gave their son the best medicine possible. But in addition to that, Ray was doing so much research on neuroscience, psychology, and those aspects because he wanted to know what happens inside our brain, how people are wired. And with that, he could understand the depths of neuroscience and psychology. So with that, he was able to develop one of his principles, which is called how people are wired differently. It is the same which I quoted at the beginning. So I think it's very important that we not only face something in our life, but we leave that after building or after developing a principle for ourselves. So those are lessons learned, right? So and this principle is very important because we all are different in ourselves, right? Just as our psychological, physiological differences, we also have our psychological differences. So that's one incident which shaped his life by giving him a great principle. And another incident is that he was diagnosed with a precancerous condition, right? So, then just after hearing this news that his doctor said that there's very thin chance of a surgery. And so Ray was ultimately preparing for death, sad for him. But then, just as anyone else would do, he was, contacting more experts. The first doctor who gave this news is also an expert. But then Ray was contacting people around the world. And one of the experts said that even though that they say it's very dangerous, this doctor said that there's a small probability of a chance for a surgery and which would cure him. But then, even though that this doctor said that there's a chance for a surgery, he did not want to go rush and do the surgery. No one wants to do that, right? We never know because all of the other people are saying that it's risky and it's dangerous. But this person was saying that there's a chance. So without rushing into the doctor who saw the positive side, he created something called a triangulating ideas between experts. So what he made was what he did was he made a conversation between these two expert doctors and himself. So he just created a dialogue. Perhaps he might have arranged a small meetup or a lunch, and then he brought this topic and he wanted to talk with these two doctors. And then these two doctors were brainstorming on this, and somehow they agreed that there's a small chance of probability for a surgery and cure rate. So then ultimately they went for the surgery and Ray was treated fine. But the learning of that story for us and even for himself is the technique of triangulating weaves with experts, right? So that is another example, another incident. So I guess, yeah, those two incidents are really interesting and I hope they're touching.
All right. So I guess you can call that the tipping points of his life
Yes.
that eventually shaped him to be who he is right now. So thank you, Vimukti. Amazing principles. And my next question is to Abhimanta. So we're talking about Steve Jobs, and obviously Apple comes up. So how has Apple, being a company, helped for a digital transformation?
Well, Apple and Steve have made huge differences in technology in the past century. We would still be using the old BlackBerry Pearl phones if Steve Jobs has not been around. Now, who would want that, right? Yeah. In 1984, Apple introduced the Macintosh, which changed the whole computer industry. And in 2001, Apple introduced the iPod, which not only changed Apple, but the whole music industry and the way we listen to music. And in 2007, Jobs introduced three new products. They were a widescreen iPod, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communication. Well, it was not three new products, but one revolutionary product. It was the iPhone. This is an iPhone 6 and this is an iPhone 11. But on that day, Steve presented the iPhone 1. Not only these, there were many more unique, creative, revolutionary products like the MacBook Pro, which had a touch bar to control all the brightness and sounds and many more. Can you believe it? Uh, when Steve Jobs introduced it in 2006, it was a huge hit. And the MacBook Air, the laptop I'm on now, had a unique shape to make it comfortable to write on. It was introduced in 2008 and became the best and thinnest notebook in the world. So I would like to talk a little about this notebook. The electronic in this notebook is as long as a pencil, and the Intel Core i5 processor is 65 times smaller than the normal one. 65 times smaller. That's surprising. Also, it doesn't have a fan. So you might think this might affect the heat of the MacBook Air. Well, no, it doesn't, which is really surprising. The thickness of this is 0.16 to 0.63 inches. Also, it can fit in the big envelopes we see today. Although the MacBook Air stops charging when it's full, Apple doesn't recommend charging it overnight. Considering all these, I think Apple went on a bigger leap than the moon landing.
All right, very interesting answer, Abhimanta. So for me, it was the creativity part that in my opinion, I think that's what sets it apart from the others. I mean, there were similar products to iPod, and I guess the most common reason why the iPod was so successful is because he introduced this catchphrase, right? He said, 10,000 songs in your pocket, and people just went nuts for it. So I really love the fact that he has that creative touch about it, and that's one of the biggest factors towards the success of Apple. So thank you, Abhimanta, for that amazing answers and for those facts. I was really surprised by some of those facts. So let's move on to Vimukti. Vimukti, now we were talking about how triangulating ideas between experts, right? So that is one of the principles, I'm guessing. So out of the many other principles discussed in this book, can you share the few principles, few of the best principles according to your view?
Yes, Fulay. So, as you said, there are many principles in the book, and there are 5 main life principles. So before touching into the principles which I found most fascinating, let me just quickly run through all the 5 principles first, right? So the first principle is embrace reality and deal with it. Embrace reality and deal with it. So it's just what it says. Reality might not be pleasant all the time. It might be harsh. We might not want to look at it, but embrace it. And to look into the reality or to understand the reality, you can look into the nature. You can look into yourself. You can look into yourself from a self-reflection or from the higher level. So that requires some sense of meditation and looking into yourself. But somehow, whatever you do, just look at yourself and understand the reality before you start anything. When you know the reality, only you can plan your next steps. So embrace the reality and work on it and deal with it. And the second principle is actually a process, which is Ray calls it the 5-step process to get what you want out of life. So in this 5-step process, there are 5 steps, obviously. So the first step is define your goals. Very clear, define your goals. Secondly, don't tolerate the problems. So you know, when we work for any goal, we have so many problems, but don't tolerate them. So you might fall down. So thirdly, diagnose the problems, diagnose the challenges. As I see, this is the most important step, because we felt that's true, but we have to have this sense and ability to diagnose our problems. And fourth, design a plan, right? Design a plan. And at last, when you have designed the plan, just push through to the completion. Just keep it doing constantly, right? And that's the second principle. And the third principle is effective decision making. So when it comes to a principle, Ray gives so many tips under this title, effective decision making. And one of the best tips, as I see, is when you are making decisions, do not be emotional, right? Keep these emotions out of your decision making process, and also synthesize your problem at hand. And also Ray shares valuable insights on navigating through levels, because when it comes to decisions or when it comes to achieving anything, there are certain levels. There's this bigger picture and there's the granular levels, and there are some intermediary steps as well. So you have to navigate through these levels effectively if you need to achieve at the correct decisions. And now the fourth, we are coming to one of the most important principles as I see, which is the radical open-mindedness. Because this is not a process or anything, this is a way of thinking. So that is why I find this as the most important one of the many. So radical open-mindedness. So to understand that, let's compare this open-mindedness with the closed-mindedness. Okay, so a closed-minded person would not want their ideas to be challenged, right? They want to be correct all the time. And whenever they are pointed with some of their mistakes, or whenever they are given an advice, they offend. And they do not want to accept it, and they make statements. They do not ask questions, and they want to make others understand but not understood. But on the other hand, as you guessed correctly, open-minded people are the total opposite of that. They are curious, they raise questions, and they are always in this observer mode. They are in the listening mode, and their response rate is very slow. Most of the times, these open-minded people are the ones who raise their voice at last. But having said that, this does not mean that they are open to anybody or they do not have faith in themselves. No, it's not like that. At the first stage, which means when they gather information, when they absorb information, they are open-minded. But when it comes to decision making and choosing one out of many, they are very critical, right? And there are a few techniques how we can practice open-mindedness. One is learn more and talk less. And the second one is the most important one. Stop the judgment for a time when you listen to others. Stop your inner voice, right? Even I have gone through that. I have felt it inside me, because whenever someone's talking, whenever someone's speaking, there's this inner voice within ourselves commenting to each and everything he says. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we not, but we judge, right? So that's bad. That is not the characteristics of good open-mindedness. If you are truly an open-minded person, you should not have that inner voice, at least until he stops speaking. And as we said, another technique is the technique of triangulating your views among experts. We talk about that. And also a big barrier to open-mindedness is our ego and our blind spots. So if we have our ego, then we falls into the category of closed-minded people. And also blind spots, because some of us have a blind spot, as in, let's say one is not able to see the granular level. They are only seeing the bigger picture. But that's fine. Just know your blind spot and have an accountability partner or a friend who sees the otherwise. So then you can have a good team and make sure that you make a better person with the help of your friend. And also, as I said, why I want to stress a bit more on why I find the radical open-mindedness most important is because, as I said, this is a way of thinking. This is not a process. So as I see, all the other principles are built on top of this radical open-mindedness, right? So this is actually, as I said, a way of thinking. And if you have the correct open-mindedness only, you can have the other principles effective. And the last principle is, which I mentioned few times now, understanding how people are wired differently. This is very important according to my idea, because we know we all have our physiological differences. Like some might be tall, some might not be tall than that, some might be short, some might be fat, but we all have our physiological differences, but we never fight on that, right? But what we fight are our psychological differences, how we are wired differently. But what Ray says is that we should not fight on those things, just as we do not fight on our physiological differences. Because having a great in-depth understanding on neuroscience, Ray says that these psychological differences are caused due to the chemical imbalance and chemical reactions of our mind. So those things are not to be fight, but to be tolerated, accepted, and changed. So, and if you know that people are wired differently, you can make great teams, because all the personalities are like double-edged swords, right? There's no one person who's totally good at creativity and totally good at the other one, right? It's a pair. It's like a double-edged sword. You are good at one thing, but you might be failing the other one. So you have to have this great understanding of how people are wired differently to form a better team and to orchestrate it, right? So as I said, the 5 principles, once again, just to recap quickly: embrace reality and deal with it, 5-step process to get what you want, effective decision making, and my favorite, radical open-mindedness, and lastly, how people are wired differently. Thank you, Fulay.
All right, a lot of valuable principles that are being discussed. So I live my life by the philosophy of Stoicism. So like what resonated a lot with me when it comes to these principles is the first principle about embracing reality. So even in Stoicism, it says that you need to step out of yourself and look at yourself in a bird's eye view to actually find out what's going on with you. And even in Stoicism, and even in the book, Ray says that do not be emotional when making decisions, because that's going to affect a lot. So amazing, valuable principles, Vimukti, you have discussed. So I was just taking notes because those are so valuable. So thank you for that, Vimukti. So let's move on to Abhimanta. So Abhimanta, now we are talking about all these tech giants, right? We have Apple, Microsoft. Now, my question to you is, why is Apple worth so much? And did Microsoft actually help Apple? And if so, how?
Yeah, so why apple, not orange or grapes? For now, Apple is worth $2 trillion. This is due to the fact that its products are extremely expensive. The most expensive Apple product is the Mac Pro. It is approximately 42 lakhs. It has a RAM of 1.5 TB. Yeah, now you can believe why it's so expensive. And you won't believe it that there are about 1.65 billion devices made by Apple. Now you can imagine why Apple is worth that much. But what are the specialties of Apple products? Well, they are one of a kind, simple, and almost eco-friendly. Also, did you know that Apple started out as a normal computer company called Apple Computers? But after the invention of the iPhone, computers dropped out of its name. For the next question, Bill Gates did lend a hand to Steve Jobs in August 1977. Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple as Apple was at the edge of bankruptcy. Without Microsoft, Apple wouldn't have been this successful. Yeah.
All right. Always interesting facts with you, Abhimanta. So thank you so much for that answer. Amazing answer. So let's dive into the principles again. So now, Vimukti, how has Ray developed these principles? So, like, what is his advice to use them in practice?
Yes, Pulai. I think it is very important to understand and be aware how he developed these principles, because at the very beginning of this book, he stresses that he does not want us to use his principles or adopt his principles in our lives. But he says that I am bringing you these my principles and also how I build it, how I developed them. So he wants us to develop our own set of principles. So as you asked, how he developed these principles. So let me just show you a quick picture from the book. So as you can see, it's in the first picture. So this is the spiral which Ray is very much, fascinated about. So he calls it the spiral of evolution. And as you saw, it has these ups and downs, just as our lives, right? So each time Ray has a fall, he comes out of it with proper diagnosis and designing of plans. But when he leaves with a principle, which he calls it a gem, right? And why he developed these principles is because he wants to face the challenges again better than the time he did previously, or just not to face in the same challenges or problems or mistakes again. So just to repeat, he develops these principles. Whenever he has a fall, he just diagnoses the problem and he looks at it and he designs a plan. And with that, he leaves with a principle, right? And then he keeps a record of it and he wants to use it again and again whenever he has a fall or a mistake or a challenge, right? And just to practice, we can simply write them down and we can retain them with the we can retain with the principles. And also Ray asks us to use pain as a trigger to look back at our principles. So it could be a pain or a fall. So whenever we feel that we are wounded or we are falling apart, go back, rush to your principles, go back to what are your lessons learned, and start applying those principles again. Perhaps it could be a new scenario, a new mistake. Then you have to do the same development of principles again. But if not, most of the times, after several ages of your life, surely you might be able to develop new principles and use them again and again. And most interestingly, what Ray does is way beyond what we can do, what we mostly do. Ray puts his principles in a software, right? He does this he programs his principles based on several triggers and he makes it a software. So even his company still is running on this principle. So whenever they want to make a decision, whenever they have done a mistake, they use their software, they use these triggers, the conditions to reach at better decisions. So that is his advice, to use these principles in practice. And also I touched how he developed these principles.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Thank you, Vimukti. Again, I am just blown away from this book. I get why so many celebrities also recommended this book to be read. So let's move on to Abhimanta's questions. So no man is complete without challenges. Like, all of us face challenges, and if there's anything free in life, it's challenges basically. So if we talk about the challenges faced by Steve Jobs, what would you say his biggest challenges were?
Yeah, well, he faced many challenges throughout his life. When he was a kid, he didn't have any friends. And when he started Apple in his garage, Almost everybody didn't listen to him. But this didn't stop him. He became the world's best entrepreneur and CEO. The Apple Lisa and the Next computer were huge challenges for Steve. Although they were not as they expected, they made some marvelous products. We can learn a lot of things from Steve Jobs. I believe that we should learn from others, and we should start early. If Apple didn't learn from other companies like Microsoft, Apple wouldn't have come this far. Obstacles are meant to be overcome. This is a very important lesson I learned from him. He had many challenges, but he overcame them all. Don't value money, value people. Steve Jobs earned $1 per year. $1. But he didn't care about it. He cared about the people he hired. He hired passionate people for both Apple and Pixar. I believe we should take risks. Jobs took many risks throughout his life that turned out to be successful. He created a personal brand. He thought differently from others. Apple is a unique brand. Even though he faced many challenges, he was smart enough to overcome them all. As a tech savvy, I learned many things from Steve Jobs. Actually, he is an inspiration to everyone.
All right, Avimanta, thank you so much for that answer. So before I move on to Vimukti's next question, I'd like to mention that to our audience that you could always feel free to ask your questions now from Abhimanta and Vimukti on the valuable books being discussed. So my next question to Vimukti is, now we're talking about two very important people, two billionaires, two geniuses, two men that perfected their craft. So now we're talking about Ray Dalio as well. So what has Ray Dalio told about people like Steve Jobs?
Yes, Fulay. Ray indeed speaks so high about Steve Jobs and people like that. And Ray calls these people shapers. And I also consider Ray himself is a great shaper as well. So just to put it in simple, Ray gives a very easy equation to understand who shapers are. I'll just talk on that, right? So a shaper is a visionary, a practical thinker, and a determined person. A shaper is a visionary, practical thinker, and determined person. So I guess if you have this visionary mindset, and to execute that, if you have this practical thinking, and if you are determined enough to perceive that, what can you not achieve in this world, right? And also these shapers, their visionary ideas are typically doubted and opposed by many, right? But still they achieve their audacious goals somehow, and they're extremely resilient, and they have all the characteristics which Abhimanta mentioned. And also just to end it, I'll just once again reiterate the equation. Shapers are visionaries, practical thinkers, and determined people. Thank you, Fulay.
All right. So I guess the crazy ones, the ones who think they call crazy, are the ones who eventually end up changing the world. So before we move on, we have a lot of positive feedback from our audience members as well, and a few questions as well. So let's start with one of the questions. So it's directed to Vimukti. So Vimukti, the audience, they are asking, what is your key takeaway? As in, what is the most important lesson that you learned from reading this book, Principles?
Yes, Fulail, as I said, out of the many principles, there are two principles which I found most fascinating, as I mentioned earlier. First one is being open-minded, and secondly, understanding that people are wired differently. Those two are the best lessons I learned from this book, and I guess many of you will also agree with that. open-mindedness and knowing how people are wired differently.
Quite different. All right. So the next question is to Abhimanta. Abhimanta, the audience are asking, what is so special? As in, what sets Steve Jobs apart? What makes him so different from the rest of us?
Yeah, well, he was a visionary. He was unique. He didn't create what others did. He was one of kind. Apple was one of kind. I think those are the two main things that separates Steve Jobs from us. He was a visionary and he was unique.
Okay, so thank you, Abhimanta. I guess the creativity adds a lot towards it too. So my final questions to you, to our wonderful panelists, Vimukti and Abhimanta, are, so you are both members of Pick a Book. Vimukti is a mentor in Caramel Pumpkin, and Abhimanta is a member of the Office Junior Club. So, Vimukti, if I can ask you, what has your experience in Pick a Book been like?
Yes, Fred. So this was actually shared in one of our mentors talk, if you can remember. So while before joining Pick a Book, I was just reading, and now I do the Pick a Book reading, right? So what Pick a Book reading is, so just going back to how I was reading before, I was just reading the book. I was not taking any notes. I was not highlighting anything. I was just reading the book for the sake of reading. But now after joining Pick a Book, I read every time knowing that I have to share this message with someone, knowing that I have to participate to a great opportunity like this, right? So I do my background research, I underline things, I highlight things, and everything, read parallel knowledge regarding to that book, because I know I have to present and share this knowledge with my friends and colleagues and public like this. So it is a huge change in the way I read, and also now I read more efficiently and more I read often than I did before. And also Pick a Book is, as I said, a great platform and a place filled with opportunity and great like-minded people.
All right. So even I mentioned in the beginning that now even for me, before I joined Pick a Book, I used to read, and let's say in 2 or 3 weeks I would forget. So in the beginning, I mentioned that the best way to learn is to teach somebody. I guess that's the whole idea we are bringing in, because I'm sure you're going to remember the book principles for the rest of your life, right? If I'm not mistaken. So let's move on to Abhimanta. Abhimanta, you've been a member of the Pick a Book Juniors, the Office Club. Now, what has your experience been like?
I joined Pick a Book Club at the beginning of last year. My mom wanted me to join this club actually. She is also a book lover. We annually buy bulks of books. So we both were interested in this club. Actually, PAB is a very good platform for reading lovers. Uh, as a book lover, before joining the club, I was kind of reading only a few genres. Mostly I read non-fiction, science fiction, and fantasy. But in our PAB club, there are friends who read different genres like mystery, comic, historical, and many more. Thus, I was inspired to read a variety of genres without sticking to few. Uh, it's uh, it is a very friendly platform where we can make friends from different backgrounds, and it's a whole new experience to my life.
I'm glad to hear that, Abhimanta. So even for me, like I was a very shy and backward person, and I'd like to thank Pick a Book basically for bringing me out of my comfort zone and asking me to present in public, because I was so scared of presenting and public speaking, and now it's just another thing for me. So I'd like to thank Pick a Book for the opportunity given. I'd like to thank our two amazing panelists for today, Vimukti and Abhimanta. for sharing valuable insights from two very interesting books. And I would also like to thank our audience members for their support and positive feedback and on today's Flipside session. So if you would like to know more about Pickabook, please visit our website, which is www.pickabook.club, or contact us on 077 5548283. I'll repeat it. You could also visit our website, which is www.pickabook.club, or contact us on 077 5548283. So I thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here today. I guess we've learned a lot of lessons today. And till we see you next time, take care, stay safe, wash your hands, and have a great weekend. Thank you, guys.
See you too. Stay safe.